Maybe it's just me, but it feels like this sad beige yarn era is simply never going to end. Except that I really don't think it's just me, because I see this complaint all of the time where you're looking for patterns, whether it's in knitting or crochet, and everything is cream, beige, taupe, all of those just hyper neutral colors that are the epitome of sad beige yarn or sad beige mom or sad beige aesthetic. And it may be under the guise that beige is a neutral, a wardrobe staple, you can't go wrong with it. And don't get me wrong, I love a good neutral just as much as anybody else. I own a few, and it's just strange to see that we're still swimming in beige and cream yarns. And if you've been feeling the pressure to keep knitting or crocheting these cream colored, beige, taupe, whatever, sweaters, blankets, everything, and just be drowning in a sea of beige, and you're sick of it, you've come to the right place. For the purpose of this video, when I'm talking about the sad beige epidemic, I'm referring to anything from like the off-white all the way down to taupes. It can be light browns, browns, and honestly, even the whole millennial gray thing, if you really want to lump it into that sad beige mom, the idea is really that it's just a wash of neutral, and everything's neutral and neutral on neutral on neutral, and everything goes, and it's all a very tonal thing. The whole sad beige mom has really trickled all the way over into knitting, crocheting, and honestly, it can seem like the sea of creams and beiges are never going to end. I have noticed a huge shift in our community with yarn, and it seems like we might be tipping the scales a little bit into more color and bold stuff. But how did this even get started? And speaking of color, let me feel a little bit more like myself. Okay, that feels so much better, and I feel a lot more like myself now that I've got myself in a little bit of a wash of color. And I think that's one of the things that we're noticing now is that when we lean into color, we can showcase our personalities so much more, which begs the question, how did this whole sad beige mom, sad beige yarn, sad beige sweater, all of the sad beigeness get so inundated in our lives in the last 5 to 6 years? I think it started innocently enough in the home decor space for Pinterest, that sort of thing. Especially if you were selling a house, it was easy to just say, hey, if you make it as neutral as possible, then if you're selling, then whoever is purchasing or looking at the home can kind of envision it for themselves, except that they never really did, and they stuck with it. And I'm just as guilty, because if you look around at any of my videos, every background are all of the white walls, and that wasn't really the plan, actually. I went to my local Lowe's, I think it was either the day I was getting the keys or the day before I was getting the keys to this house. And there was one person in front of me who had, I think, like 2 or 3 gallons of paint. And I'm thinking, this won't be too bad at all. I didn't realize that there was never an associate helping them, because we kept asking for help, and like 45 minutes later, he hadn't been helped. Still no one was at the paint counter, and I gave up, and I went, well, that's my sign, and I just left it and never got around to painting, because painting is a lot of work, and it's so much easier when your stuff is not in the house. So I'm just as guilty, especially because I've kind of just gotten used to it. And that's really interesting, because we've been so exposed and hyper exposed to it on Instagram and Pinterest that I've kind of just gotten used to this wash of neutral. And also, some of it was born out of this whole minimalism thing and quiet your mind and have these blank canvases, or, well, not canvases, but this blank palette for when you come home, that your mind is so overworked, and when you come home, it's just neutral and you can just turn off your mind. Color, or lack of color in this case, can help in that situation, but I don't know about you. That doesn't really work for me. One of the other conversations when it comes to the cream and natural looking sweaters and yarn in particular is that there's the sustainability aspect of it, where there are knitters and crocheters who would prefer to work with undyed fibers, so that way they are minimizing their carbon footprint and leaning more into natural things, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't necessarily feel like that's by and large the biggest component of this, but also I can see where if you feel like there's all this overconsumption and you're living a more natural, sustainable life, and that is something that you are incredibly passionate about, that is something that I wouldn't take away from anyone. Personally, I take the stance of, I think it was Elise that said it the most perfectly recently, where she said, you know what, I understand that my yarn consumption, and I think she was talking about acrylic yarns, but this is, the same conversation for undyed yarns or minimally processed yarns, is that yarn, I understand I'm going to overconsume and have a heavier carbon footprint than what I would like, but I like the things that make me happy and bring me joy. And for me, that is color. And I can do better in so many other areas of our life. And inherently being human on this earth, we are going to have a carbon footprint. There's no way around it. Since the beginning of humans building fire, we started our carbon footprint. And again, there's a place to do better. I think it's awesome that there are people who really stick by their principles and their values in that sustainability, as natural as possible mindset, and bringing that into their fashion and their knitting and crocheting and yarn pursuits. I tend to buy more into that when I see that in all aspects of their lives. But then again, now that I'm thinking about it, if I feel like my yarn consumption is like overconsumption and probably one of my largest carbon footprint, I can go ahead and pull back everywhere else. And maybe they feel like they overconsume in other areas and they don't feel so compelled in their knitting and yarn to also overconsume, and this is their way of pulling back, but also participating in the arts. I cannot wait to see what you have to say down in the comments, because I love our conversations so much. If you are someone who doesn't typically live in the comments section, when I do these very opinion-y videos, there's a lot going on down there, and I highly recommend just learning from each other. By and large, everyone has been so respectful, and I appreciate that. So thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for having these wonderful conversations so that we can learn from each other and not just win the conversation. And honestly, the whole taupe thing has gotten so inundated that even the color of the year from Pantone for 2025 is Mocha Mousse, which is this kind of coolish, dark taupey, light brownish color that they knew what they were doing. They are trying to encompass this era that we're in of just slap a neutral on everything. And, they probably think they're pushing the bounds by going darker and making it cool toned. But it's okay. And then it's almost got that gray in there. So they're trying to also satisfy the whole millennial gray thing. And even for myself, thinking back to when this whole wash of neutrals started, I was making a baby blanket for a friend, and I thought, well, wouldn't it be fun, instead of going on the nose pink, to do a corally color? And I thought it turned out absolutely great. And I kind of wanted it for myself, to be honest. And I didn't realize how dedicated this friend, because I really don't associate with her anymore. We've drifted apart, not because of the blanket. We've just drifted apart for other reasons. She relegated that baby blanket down to the basement with all of the other colorful toys. So yeah, no color allowed on any of the main living levels, and that was just... It's fine, it's her house, it's her gift to do as she pleases with, but that was really where the sadness started to creep in. And I could go off into a side tangent on how exposing children, especially babies, to lots of colors, especially the primary colors in their developmental time, is supposed to be very beneficial for them to be able to develop those color sensations and detection. And there's a whole evolutionary thing of why color is important to us. That was really sad to feel like I could no longer make colorful things for babies anymore. And honestly, well, I guess I didn't really know that many people after that were having babies, so that also kind of helped. But that was really kind of sad to feel like, oh, well, if I want to make a baby gift, it's got to be like bland and boring and neutral and not any kind of baby colors or fun, bright baby colors, because I've done bright baby blankets before, and luckily the person that got the most ridiculously bright baby blanket just absolutely loved and adored it, and I'm sure it got plenty of views. We are supposed to develop this sensation of color as humans and as babies and children. So I think that's why there was such a big uproar when it just got way out of hand, and it felt like you would get attacked for coming up with something colorful or wanting to promote colorful children's toys and blankets and clothing and accessories. And so there was that era of like all the kids were just in boring khaki beige nonsense. And again, I'm looking around at the stores and it seems like we might be coming up on the end of that. And tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm kind of glad we are getting over it. And going back to the whole theory of, well, if you want to sell a home, you paint everything white or off-white and carpet it all neutral, like a beigey color, so that way someone can picture it all on their own. And I do agree that that can also translate into knitting and crocheting for the purpose of, if I am a designer and I want to photograph my finished piece, if I make it in an off-white or cream color or something, you can really get a lot of the stitch definition and any kind of details, especially if it's a nice clean design and it was very well knit and crafted or crocheted and crafted with your hands. There is a lot of benefit to that. And then I think in a lot of designers' minds, it's like, okay, but then whoever is making it can picture it in a fuchsia or a teal or aqua or whatever their heart desires, except that somehow a lot of knitters and crocheters got it in their mind that they have to make it in that cream color. And it's weird because I used to tell people I'm not a particularly creative person. I know how to follow, like, crochet and knit seem like very creative pursuits, and my whole thing on that is I know how to follow instructions and patterns, and really my only creativity is in the color that I choose. And I almost never, I can think of like, okay, one thing recently as a pattern test, but aside from that, I don't think I've ever knit or crocheted a single item in exactly the same colors as what was prescribed or called for in the original pattern description or instructions. I could be wrong, but that's really, for the longest time, that was my only creative aspect of crochet and knitting, is that I'm just going to swap out the colors. But other than that, I'm following the instructions to a T. Have I started straying a little bit from that? Sure. Have I started getting better at making my own modifications or tailoring? Sure. So that's a whole separate thing. But then for some reason, that never really, I know there are a lot of people that when they see a pattern, they feel like they have to knit or crochet in whatever exactly the pattern calls for. I think it's a little strange, honestly. Now, if you like it as is, then and it's your project. You're the one spending all the money and the time to knit or crochet this item. So if what you see in a magazine, on a pattern page, whatever, that's exactly what you want, then sure, don't stray for it. Now, if you're doing it for fear of, I don't know how this will look in another color, well, I mean, that to me is really sad because I want people to feel like they can play with color. And I don't even know that it's a fear of how it's going to look. I really do feel like it was because we've been inundated with all the Pinterest, Instagram, and the more we see creams and beiges and taupes, the more normal that's become. And, you know, it's funny because I was kind of tying up all the stuff last night, and as I was, flipping through YouTube to have something on the background, I did see a video titled something to the effect of "Algorithm Killed Color." I did not click on it because I knew I was filming this today and I wanted this to stand on its own. And just basing this off the title, I have not actually watched it yet. I don't even necessarily think that it's the algorithm itself that has killed color, because trends have always existed. If you think about certain things, like, okay, I'm looking at this like golden green ugly ass chair behind the camera right now, and honestly, like, that was so 80s. Everyone had shit like that. I'm sorry. All of our grandmothers had that goldy, greeny, kind of like velvety floral couch. So these trends they didn't have the internet back then. They didn't have the algorithm back then. That's just what got sold, and you would see a neighbor with it and you're like, oh my gosh, I have to have it. That's like the coolest thing ever. And like, okay, sure. It was always that way. Like, your refrigerators were golden harvest or avocado or whatever. So I don't think it was an algorithm thing. I think color trends are cyclical. And so the more I thought about this, the more research I did. And let me tell you, I've read a lot of research papers on colors and psychology and color experiments that kind of have to disagree. Now, are we getting these trends maybe faster and it feels more inundated? Maybe. I think it feels more exaggerated because it's online. So then it's like reflecting everything. So like, it's like you see it in your house and you're seeing it online. So it feels bigger than what it used to be. So that's a whole separate aside. I can't wait to watch that video. I'm probably going to put it on, honestly, while I'm editing this video, just to see. And anyway, I'm also going to link that down below because I'm sure it's going to be very interesting. But I also wanted to get into more of this whole color psychology. Speaking of color psychology, so beige often represents simplicity, softness. It's kind of a background color, and typically the people who enjoy beiges want to be the background characters, which I find very interesting and a little bit of a oxymoron. I think that kind of juxtaposes social media because there's like a lot of main character energy, but also the beigeness behind them, which is interesting. I didn't even think to go down that rabbit hole. This is just something that I'm thinking in real time right now. But beige also tends to lead to a psychological desire for order, organization, symmetry, that sort of thing. And I think that's why there was such a huge draw on social media for it, because it just seemed so clean and I'm so organized and I'm so Stepford wife, and look how amazing I can keep my home. And now it's bled into the sweater and yarn thing of like, look how classic and amazing this is all the time. And it's almost like if I wear this, I'm trying to convey that I am an orderly, organized person. I'm very simple. I'm not high maintenance. I am just a very serene person to be around. It has that feeling of cleanness, hope, purity. And then of course, when you have a good classic beige neutral taupe, anything like that, it really can convey a feeling of status or wealth and is often seen on celebrities. And I think that's why we saw a lot of influencers draw into that, is because it was conveying a certain amount of like wealth and authority and social clout and all of that sort of stuff. And of course, it will always be timeless and there always is a place for it. I just feel like when your whole life is beige and you wear nothing but beige, it can feel very negative and start getting boring and complacent and can come across as dull and unimaginative. And we've seen all of those comments on TikTok about, boy, this is boring and uninspired. And even it can come across as ambivalent or cold or sterile. And I think that's why I think we might be on a shift of seeing this trend of starting to go more bold. Largely the whole sad beige trend really blew up around 2020 because of so many different factors. We were already kind of an Instagram instant gratification kind of society. Facebook was getting a little bit more fast paced, and we were getting introduced to TikTok and lots of bright colors and short videos and flashes and this and that and everything else. So then all of a sudden, when the world had a chance to stop, so many of us had time to pause, and we needed a reprieve from all these bright colors and flashes. And we weren't going to set down our phones because we still need, I don't know, I guess that escape and the dopamine, and of course the world was stopped, so we wanted to feel connected in some way, shape, or form. But what we could control was our aesthetics, our backgrounds, our clothing, all of that stuff. So many people embraced minimalism in 2020. I mean, donation centers were turning people away. Even myself, because I moved in 2020, I got to the point that in early 2021, I had to make the decision as I was unpacking to just simply throw so much stuff away because it wasn't worth it for me to keep hanging on to stuff that I didn't need anymore. But also, Goodwill and the other donation centers in the area didn't necessarily want it. And interestingly enough, we can think of like the social media trends and marketing trends as being the main drivers for this internal need for beigeness and, you know, that whole reprieve from all the flashes and colors. And while there's probably a lot of truth to that, we were creating this perfect storm because also, interestingly enough, when I looked at the cycles of colors and what's trendy over time, year over year, decade over decade, century over century, when there's a feeling of political unrest is when we tend to really embrace our neutrals and go into our beiges, our creams, our taupes. And what other time in our life, in our recent history, was there any more political unrest than in 2020? If you're watching this video, chances are you're old enough that you remember it, even if you're on the younger end. So I'm not going to go a whole lot into that because we're all going to have opinions and arguments, and please save that stuff from the comments. That's not what this video was about. I just thought it was very, very interesting that when there is so much of a feeling of whether it's social injustice or a feeling of instability or we don't know what's going to happen to the economy, that we tend to go very neutral and pull back. So yes, minimalism was kind of a thing, but also we were just feeling like we needed comfort. I know personally, when I wear creams or taupes or anything like the sweaters that I had on earlier, I wear those things when I'm feeling a little bit off and I'm not feeling like myself and I want to blend in and I don't want to stand out and I don't want a whole lot of attention. So to me, that makes perfect sense that we just wanted to draw into ourselves and just hunker down and wait and see what was going to happen in the world because we just didn't know. And right now, even still, 5 years later, we're still feeling that. Anytime there is a change in administration, whatever side you are on, you are going to feel very uncertain. So because the administration has flipped and flopped so much in the last 5 years, it makes sense that both sides feel like they've been upended and they don't know what to expect next. And as humans, we are tribal beings and we want to generally feel a little bit of a collectiveness, a sameness. And so it makes sense that we were all kind of bonding in our beigeness, if that makes sense. And I know someone's going to be like, oh, I would never wear beige because I'm such a rebel. Okay, well, there's always going to be those people. And then, okay, so then next thing, what if fuchsia is, like, everyone has fuchsia on? Then you're going to be the rebel that goes to beige because you just want to. So I'm not speaking to that. I'm just talking about the collective, tribal instinct that we all have. And there is a practicality in going with that beigeness and going, well, now I don't have to chase the trends because it's always a classic, and I don't have to worry about spending money on trendy pieces because, again, they're never going to go out of style. Those two sweaters probably, if they go out of my wardrobe, it's because either they don't fit in an extreme manner anymore, or I've worn them out or something like that, because they are good pieces and you can still wear those things. Again, I tend to wear them on days where I just want to feel a little bit more muted. Some days it's when I do want to feel a little bit classier, because for like the taupe sweater in particular, if I want to feel that like a little bit of, I don't want to say richness, but kind of, and have like kind of project that feeling of a little bit more luxe. I'm just feeling like, you know what? I want to feel a little bit more luxe today. I'm going to pair that with a chocolate corduroy pant. And honestly, to me, it works. But also there's ways to make those colors pop. I could put on a colored pant. I have orange pants somewhere. I don't know that I would wear them with the cream or the orange, but I'm often wearing navy blue pants with the cream colored top. It pulls out those blue flecks a lot more. It just gives it a very interesting look. So there are ways to play around with it and accessorize. And so I'm not saying go ahead and throw away all of your beige clothing or stop knitting your cream colored cardigans or anything like that, because they can exist in our wardrobe. And it does make sense that if we were feeling like our budget is tight and we don't know what's going to happen next, that I'm going to lean on those more, because I'm not going to have to worry too much about getting out of style. And it's still going to just work somehow. Now, that said, regardless of how you feel about the economy and money, because for a lot of people, things are very tight right now, and there is a lot of uncertainty. And finding another job is very difficult right now. I completely understand that, but I also am starting to feel that shift. And so maybe we're just starting to feel a little bit more hopeful. Maybe we're all just feeling very sick of cream and beige everything, because I do see a resurgence of this very bold color palette coming back into yarn and knitting and crocheting. The more I look around on Instagram, here on YouTube, I'm seeing a lot of yarnies out there like myself really leaning into bolds, whether it's I'm into, personally, my jewel tones. I'm really trying to embrace things that make me feel more in my power, and to me, that is jewel tones. And I've seen neons going around, and even AKA Nora Knits put out a video where she realized, oh my gosh, I've knit so much in cream and chocolate brown that she's in her color era. We are, as yarnies, almost taking a stand and almost rebelling against this sad beige era and going, okay, well, we've had our sad beige yarn era, because obviously what goes on in fashion, we tend to sort of mimic and bring it into our own craft. I think we're almost kind of done with it, or at least most of us are kind of done with it, because we want to knit and crochet with these colors. And I think that knitters and crocheters really can be drivers of fashion trends. A lot of times we've thought of knitting and crocheting as being lagging in the trends, but this might be the time that, because knitting and crochet has become so popular and popularized on social media, that this is our chance that we can put a huge influence on the fashion industry and say, this is enough. We don't want the same boring shit that you've been putting out season after season after season. We need color. We need to feel like ourselves. We need to have personality. We need to feel individual. And I think that's a lot of the draw for knitting and crocheting, is that you can put so much of your own personality and spin on stuff, especially the more you develop your skills, and you can create such masterpieces and colorfulness. And even the paint brand PPG has put out an article that in such a politically charged climate, that bolder colors are going to be coming back hard. And I don't even think it has to be a political statement. I think it's just we are coming together to want to show off our own individuality and make it okay to want to spotlight ourselves in our own individual uniqueness and what makes us happy. And we can celebrate that together. And it's a different kind of togetherness because now you're not just going to stick out like a sore thumb against the sea of creams and beiges. You're just going to be a collective bright colorfulness and just bring so much joy to others, and we can play on each other and we can appreciate someone else's style even if it's not our own. I've talked about that before where I can look at something and go, it's not for me, but I appreciate the time and effort and artistry that goes into it. And I think that's what's coming up more and more now. And I think back to when I first got onto Ravelry, there actually were a lot of forums that were, very polarizing forums. And it was interesting because I felt like back then you could really have good, solid conversations about what's going on in the world and what you like and what you don't like and your fears and everything like that. Because by and large, I think this last vote, you voted against whatever you were afraid of. And I don't mean to make this such a political sounding video, but that's what the research is showing, is that color is indicative a lot of times of what is going on politically in our lives. And whether we realize it or not, there's all of these external influences and economy and socioeconomic things. And I think that if we embrace our uniqueness, we can almost come together that way and have more conversations and not debates, because debates is about winning the conversation and not about listening to each other. So I personally would like to think that the yarn community can make this divide that we've been feeling close up. I've already talked about in my last video where the knitters versus crocheters mentality is really shrinking because of social media, and we're talking to each other, and it's like we can do so much more, and we can learn about the other one and not put one on the pedestal while we're shoving down the other thing. And I think that's a great place to be in 2025. And I think it's also really important to bring color back in. I mentioned earlier in the video the importance that color plays on childhood development. But color is actually also really important as we get older as a society. A lot of us are getting older. One of the things I discovered while I was researching for this video is there is a reason that older men and women tend to wear brighter, bolder clothing. And that is because as we get older, our perception of color declines and fades. And so we don't see it the same, which I found very interesting. And so wouldn't we like our elder selves to have all these pops of colors and not just see a sea of nothingness? The one study even went into where they went into nursing homes for dementia patients, and they studied the difference between if they have just the boring, sterile, classic hospital color scheme versus when they went ahead and painted different hallways, different colors, and different landmarks, different things, and maybe a pop of orange over here. And it dramatically helped the dementia patients and improved their quality of life because they would see those colors and know where they were at in the nursing home and not just feel like they were wandering around and not knowing what they were, where they were, or what they were doing, and just feeling so lost. They actually had landmarks that even in their cognitive decline, they could lean on colors as anchors to go about their day. And wouldn't we like to, as an aging society, take a little bit of comfort in ourselves by saying, hey, let's bring color back so that way our quality of life in the future can be dramatically improved. We're not feeling it yet, but someday we will. And maybe this is coming from a place where I have aging parents, and Well, currently I am very lucky that there has not been a whole lot of cognitive decline in them, and they are still independent and on their own. That may not always be the case, and God forbid I have to make the awful, awful choice with my siblings to put either of them in a home. I'd want to give them some sense of life, and life is in color. Life is meant to be lived in color. And yes, I do know that there is a portion of my audience that is colorblind or completely blind. And unfortunately, I am not the best person to speak to that. And I don't know if there is anyone out there that can. And I would love to hear your experience on whether it's a full color blindness or if brighter colors do help at all. I know even for myself, there are certain shades of like blue and purple to me that completely blur the line, and I cannot 100% tell if it's blue or purple, and I've been told I've been wrong before. So I do have, a speck of color blindness of myself. It's very, I would say, minimal. I've also actually wondered if we all perceive colors differently. This is going down a different rabbit hole, which tells me I'm rambling now, and I probably need to wrap this up because you've listened to me yap a lot today. I would just love to hear your thoughts on this conversation. What kind of knitting or crochet era or fashion era or home decor era are you in? If your beiges and neutrals are starting to get moved a little bit to the back of the closet and not becoming the center of your wardrobe anymore, if you've stuck all the way to the end, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. If this is your first time visiting, I'm sorry I did not introduce myself at the very beginning. Hi, my name is Holly, and thank you so much for joining me in my Northeast Ohio home today, where we like to talk about projects we're working on, yarn things, and more I've been getting into commentary on what is going on in the knit and crochet community. And I've been having so much fun with it. And it's also obvious to me that you seem to love these videos. So thank you so much for listening to me ramble about my thoughts on color, the sad beige yarn era. And if you're interested in listening to more of my opinions on what's going on in the crochet, knit, and yarn communities, you can check out this playlist right here. And as always, I cannot wait to visit with you in the next one. Bye!